What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Debbie Rao YouTube channel. Me and Christian are back. We're back with our series breaking down the top 25 college football programs, going through their entire roster, their recruiting class, their schedule. If you love college football, you love this team, you stay here, hit that like and subscribe button. We're going to the Oregon State Beavers. They come in at number 24 on ESPN's rankings. If you missed our last team, we did the North Carolina Tar Heels, Christian's North Carolina Tar Heels, and talked about Drake May and what we can expect from him in the Heisman area. Now we're going to Oregon State, coming back to Oregon to the West Coast, the best coast, and we're going to talk about this team. So while the intro is going, hit that like and subscribe button. All right, let's get into Oregon State. Let's talk about them and kind of get into them. Last year they had a great season, tops it off at the end with Oregon and Florida. Beat Oregon 38-34, absolutely destroyed Florida in the Las Vegas Bowl 30-3, and really came out of the way. Only 3 losses last year, to Washington by 3. They got kind of beat by Utah, and then USC by 3. So really, they were right there in all those games outside of the Utah game. So when we come back into this year, what do we have for them? And we're looking at their offense and roster. So I'm going to let Christian kind of take it away on the offense, what we can expect from them. Obviously, their O-line returning is a big thing, and then they got a key transfer, as you can tell.
Yeah, so most of their offensive line is back, but we can't start this conversation without talking about DJ Uiagalelei, who, he's kind of in a quarterback battle right now, but obviously the former 5-star recruit was at Clemson. Things didn't really work out for him there. He kind of regressed each time he got on the football field, and so a fresh start is certainly necessary for him, but I also think that it gives this offense a little bit more upside. Last year, they were a very efficient running offense, but their passing attack wasn't the strongest. I think this year with DJU and a couple of those returning wide receivers, I think you can look at more of a balanced attack. And I think if you take last year's rushing attack and add a more balanced passing attack, then you've got the ingredients for a pretty lethal offense. So it's all going to come down to if he's actually good, though. I think that's the problem is, from what we've seen, he might not even win that job. Do you want to talk about Aiden Childs real quick?
Yeah, I mean, Aiden Childs is there. We're talking about in terms of recruits and everything there. But when you see what they were able to do with him, 6'4", 195 kid, 4-star kid. Aiden's one of those kids from Downey, California out here that has really kind of shown the coaches he's an early enrollee. Like, hey, he's got that kind of maturity that they like to see. I mean, he's pushing him. He's pushing DJU from all of the articles and all the stuff I see from the beat writers. Like, they're like, hey, this kid is actually really mature by his age. And if DJ doesn't come out and perform very well, I think Aiden can pop in there. And I think that they're going to be comfortable with that. I think the scary thing about DJ is he did that interview when they were talking about his time at Clemson, and he was talking about like the offense and how he kind of struggled with, picking it up quickly and all that kind of stuff. Like, for me, when you're thinking of like him coming to Oregon State, how fast can he pick up the system on a team that wants to win? They've characteristically shown that they want to come out and compete for Pac-12 titles. So that's the thing with DJU that I think is the biggest one. We've talked about DJ for a long time on this channel, on our podcast that we have. I hope he succeeds because, I don't necessarily think all of it was his fault at Clemson. I think he picked a bad school to go to because I don't necessarily think that offense was very good for him. Now, this offense might be. So we're talking about kind of maybe a run-heavy system where he gets the ball out quick and can make good decisions, play action, and he not necessarily have to be lean on too much, right? He just has to take care of the football. Like, I think that's where that DJU kind of, okay, what can he do? But when we think about it, we'll talk about some of the losses out here for him. Not a ton of losses, as you can tell. Chance Nolan, that's probably a good loss that they had. I like Chance did well. He did well. But the biggest rumor out there, as we know, the last 2 years, they've been looking for that transfer quarterback. They missed on a lot of guys that came in there. And so that's why they got DJU. You saw Chance kind of go out there, and Chance kind of limited their upside. There was no way they were beating a Washington team, probably a Utah team, a USC team with that quarterback play. Brandon Kipper, offensive guard, and my guy, Luke Musgrave. I love me some Luke Musgrave. Got injured last year in the Fresno State game that I was attending. But I mean, realistically, Luke's a pretty big piece there. We like Luke, but he didn't necessarily win any of those games that we saw last year, like because of the injury that he was out there. So really, realistically, if DJ plays just well enough, this team is ready to go again.
Yeah. And I think the good part is then you can come back and you can lean on Damian Martinez, who was really, really good last
Yeah.
year. And so even if DJU isn't, the top form, maybe like what we saw a couple years ago when he came in for Trevor, when Trevor got COVID, I
Yeah.
think, and he like balled against Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Even if he doesn't get all the way back up to that level, you still have Damian Martinez back there. And I think you can argue, I like Will Shipley. But I think that within their offense, I think Damian Martinez has the
Yes.
ability to kind of take over games. And so I think, yeah, you're right. They're returning a ton. And I think, it comes down to DJU. But on the other side of things, they were good last year without good quarterback play.
Yeah.
So this should still be a really good offense.
100%. And with what they're bringing in too on the offensive side here, they brought in a really good class. I would say for Oregon State, it was fairly well, 49 composite rank. You're not going to get like the big time rankings in terms of where Oregon State's at. But I think their coach, Jonathan Smith, has done a great job of finding diamonds in the rough and in developing them. And that's something that you'd like to see there. I will say they did see there that they needed to get some wide receivers. And you see the wide receiver and you see that they prioritized that. So they went out in there and they did get it. So Montreal Hatton, Reddick's there, Zachary Card, and in offensive line and tight ends, kind of what you thought. Obviously, Aiden's the big piece. When you're thinking of Aiden Childs, what he is. But they did go target that wide receiver room because outside of that, just going through it, what is that wide receiver room going to look like? There's some question marks there. Like just kind of going over who's going to emerge as that. They have Anthony Gold and Silas Bolden, and they're very solid. But who can be that 3 guy? Who's going to step up and be that wide receiver 3 on that roster? But I will say this from the 247 Beaver Blitz, when they talked about him, there was one name that they kept saying, Zachary Card right there. It's a 3-star kid. They kept saying, be on the lookout for this kid. He's really impressed. He was an early enrollee. He's from Pittsburgh, California. Smaller guy, but they said that he might be able to be that wide receiver 3 for this offense.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part is I think Silas Bolden kind of has that slot locked down. I do wonder though if there's a scenario in which they just roll out Silas as the Z receiver and Zachary Card ends up starting at some point
Yeah.
this year, because I think that there's certainly an opportunity for that. But yeah, I've heard that as well. Just that seems to be the freshman wide receiver that is generating the most buzz, and I think could be an impact player this year.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about transfers real quick. We already talked about DJU. I'm gonna tell you, I'm a sucker for tight ends like Jermaine Terry II from Cal. They targeted him, they brought him in, and I will say this: like going through, we write a manifesto here, we did this huge update, and for me, he was one of the guys I wrote about in the manifesto as like a sleeper, just because when you're thinking of Oregon State, tight end position, big kid, really solid athlete. I'm a big fan of Jermaine Terry. I really think that he can kind of step up if he can kind of win that job. So Jermaine Terry is a good one. Obviously, getting those offensive line transfers in there and going through there. Let's talk about the impact players. So you talk about Damian a lot. Do you see NFL upside with Damian?
Yeah, I think so. I'd really like to see another season of it. We've had conversations about running backs and what the NFL tends to like, but I think there's something to build off of from last year, at least for Damian.
Yeah, and in that room, you have Damian there. I think that you really saw him kind of take off. He only had 161 carries last year for 982 yards, but he was really slow out of the gate. And I think that was a coaching staff thing. When you watched him play, and I watched him play in person, you could tell he was one of the best players in that field. Like he gets out there, you're like, oh, this kid is different. And behind him, you have Deshaun Finwick, Jam Griffin. Those guys had over 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns last year combined. You talked about Silas Bolden, and then really, yeah, the quarterback, DJU or Aiden Childs. Like from that offensive perspective, these are the guys that got to step up. And Bolden's just that sneaky guy to just catch his balls. Like he's just gonna be that guy that he could really just be a target getter and just move that offense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Silas Bolden is going to be like the weapon on the offensive side of the ball that like makes this go. He was good last year. I wouldn't say he had like a breakout year or anything like that, but I think when you talk about the most consistent player, I think Pro Football Focus graded him the highest of the group, and I think that he certainly showed that he has the ability to make things happen. So I'm excited to see him work, but yeah, a lot of opportunity in that wide receiver room behind him too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. All right, let's jump over there. So that's the offensive breakdown. So going through kind of what we expect. And I really think like their offense can be better than in 2022. So overall, I do think that from a statistical standpoint and maybe from an efficiency standpoint, they could be better in 2023 from an offensive side. I will say their defensive side, though, they've lost a little bit. So only 58% returning here. They've lost some transfers. They've lost some guys to injuries here in the spring that we'll definitely dive into and kind of take a look at that. You had some numbers, right, that you wanted to kind of spew out a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, on the defensive side of the ball, their strength last year was certainly in coverage. They were a top 15 team, top 12 team in taking away the passing attack. But I mean, across the board, this defense was really impressive last year. Their defensive line really stepped up. They did lose some pieces there. And these starters that we have listed are kind of the projected starters. There's certainly opportunity for guys to rotate into this group. They do have a lot of depth. I will say that. I think, despite losing a ton of guys, they should be able to rotate in. But from an actual like Pro Football Focus standpoint, they ranked 16th overall in their overall defensive grade. So really good year. I think they've got to improve on that if they want to, continue succeeding. But I think, you look at these players here, most people, Oregon State fans will certainly know these names. Draft community, Devy community, probably not going to know many of these guys, but a lot of good players here and guys that can really contribute and fit well in that scheme too.
Yeah, and I'll say this: they were a top 25 team last year in rush defense, especially with rushing yards allowed. Like they were really stout in the middle, and that's one of the reasons why they were able to give. They should have beat USC. If anybody watched that game last year when they lost 17-14, USC could not run on them, and then their coverage was so damn good they could not break away in that coverage there, and they just couldn't do anything offensively. If they had anything at the quarterback position last year that could have put them over the hump in that game, I think they would have won, right? So, like, I do think from a perspective there. Now, the reason why we're talking about some losses, so let's get into some losses. So, one big one is Skylar Thomas. The big thing I was reading going through, he tore his ACL here in the spring. They wanted him to play everything. They thought he was going to be the cover guy, kind of playing the box, do a lot of different things for them. He's out for the year now. Then they lost the inside linebacker Omar Spates, who went to LSU. You're losing a kid to a SEC school like LSU. That's a big loss. And they talked about him already crushing it in camp at LSU. So, realistically, you losing two very, very solid pieces that you thought maybe you could have on that roster. And then, hey, Rajon Wright, Alex Austin, and Jaden Grant, all those guys really Jaden Grant was kind of that utility DB. Then you have straight up cornerbacks and Alex and Rajon. Like those guys are really, really good. And you're losing a lot of pieces. So I would say this. From just going through and diving into this defense, they've got to really develop these kids and ready to go, because that is, I think, their weakness now. Now they're going to have to flip the script a little bit. I think their offense is going to have to make up for their defense this year, or it's going to be kind of a rougher year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the good thing is you've got two returners in that secondary, if you include Ryan Cooper Jr., who is their primary slot corner. I think having that consistency, as well as Oladapo, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sorry if I'm not, but those two guys providing some of that like veteran leadership, like this is what happened last year. This is the standard that we have to play to. I think that's going to help develop those young guys, but certainly, more excited about the returners on offense than I think the defense, just from a consistency standpoint.
Yeah, and I think James Rawls too. Like you're thinking of James Rawls going to step up and be on that defensive line. Like I think that's going to be big for them. And they talked about him being the leader of that. He had over 10 tackles for loss on that team, so definitely going to have some guys step up. The recruiting class, though, man, they really did a pretty good job of finding guys. And defensive line, and you can see defensive line, edge, and then little corners kind of thrown in there. They knew where they needed to go. Kelsey Howard out of Las Vegas, he was a number 2 player in Nevada, and he 4-star kid, and he went. He's top 40 recruit, one of the highest recruits there for Oregon State. And then Aiden Childs, obviously, from an offensive perspective, those two guys really make this class. And then you keep going here. Nico Taylor, again, really good edge, position-wise in that area. He's a community college. He went to Hutchinson Community College, so he's a JUCO kid. He is ready to go. Like, he was the number 1 JUCO kid at his position. So he came to Oregon State. So when you're thinking of reloading, they definitely did. Like, those guys, and they've already talked about Howard being an impact player as soon as this year. He's a big kid ready to go. and Nico can do that too because of that JUCO status. Those two guys really kind of like solidified these recruits there. You guys can see the other ones. You could tell they really target that cornerback position. Those guys though, like Tyrese Ivy's an interesting one because he came from the College of San Mateo. So again, you're looking at kind of those JUCO kids that come out there, like, hey, 6'3", 180, so a little bit of a bigger kind of cornerback status there. So I like this group that they got from those recruits, and they got some impact guys too.
Yeah, and Ivy, I don't know if you noticed on the last slide. I mean, he's projected to start this year.
Yeah.
I think that he is going to be one of those like X factor type of players where if he's getting cooked on that side, I think they could struggle a bit. But if he comes in ready to go, 6'3", 180, long arms, like that's the type of corner I like to watch. So I'm excited to see what he's able to do out there too.
Yeah. And then, all right, let's go over to their transfers. So they did hit the transfers. It wasn't all bad there for the defensive side. Calvin Hart came from Illinois, and Illinois had a really good defense last year. So from that perspective, you could be like, okay, hey, I like that area there. Mason Mason
Tafaga.
Tafaga, yes, Mason. He came from Utah, so we're talking about that. He came out of a 4-star kid, out of high school, now a 3-star transfer. But again, you're looking at these guys, and when they're not transferring down into levels and going to like the Mountain West or whatever, like that's a good sign for me. And then they grabbed an edge, Amama Tasho. So when you're looking at those guys, 6'2", 246, he's a Wyoming kid, so he transferred up, so he's definitely out there. So they did fill their needs, I think. Like they looked at it and said, hey, we got to fill these gaps. I think collectively it might not be like individual players that step up, but as a whole, as a unit, if these guys stay healthy, I think they can counterbalance some of those losses that they had.
Yeah, and that goes back to like I do think that they did a good job in creating depth. So
Yeah.
despite the lack of returners, that depth is certainly there because a lot of these like key transfers and when we get to the impact players, like these are guys that aren't even projected to start, but guys that we think can then rotate in and be impact performers by the end of the season. And I think they're going to need that. I think it's going to be less reliance. If you look at their snap counts last year, it was very much so a 13 kid rotation and then the rest like kind of rotated in. I think this year they're going to go deeper. They're going to rotate a little bit more. And, getting these transfers in is a big part of that.
Yep. And then let's go over the impact players. We talked about all these guys really. I'm really, for me, I'll just talk about one. I'll let Christian. I'm interested to see what Howard does. Can he step up, really kind of elevate himself in this recruiting class and kind of dive into it and just be that guy? Like, with 6'4", 250, the measurables are there. Like he might be one of Pac-12's like freshman. He'll contend for Pac-12 freshman of the year on the defensive side. If he gets out there, he gets those snaps and he can be that guy, especially. I will say this. We've talked about it. We know it. The Pac-12's loaded on offense and quarterback position. The quarterbacks from top to bottom, probably outside of Cal and Stanford, are really, really good. Like excellent quarterback play that you're going to see. So you need a guy like Howard and some of these DBs to step up, obviously, but you guys got to get Howard and those guys disrupting that backfield, or it's going to be a long ass day playing against Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. and these guys, Caleb Williams. So you're going to have some struggles in the Pac-12 because the quarterback play is elevated in that conference for this year.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, when you look at how they performed last year, that defensive line from a run defense perspective was really good, but getting to the quarterback and actually, generating a ton of pressures, they need someone that can be an impact type of player. So that's a good call. Oladapo as well. I think, I talked about the leadership on the back end of things, but when you watch that USC game, like he was all over the place. And so I'm excited to see him play this year. This is a very well coached unit. So I think, some of the concerns that we talk about might be masked by just a really well coached team that just goes out there and kind of repeats last year. And like we talked about, we'll get into their schedule in a second. I'm getting ahead of myself here.
We'll jump into the schedule. I'll say this though. They have one of the best coaching staffs in the country, and bar none. Their defensive line coach is touted. Even Cover 3 podcast covered him the other day. I know that John Smith's really good. And you know what? He really sealed it for me last year when he went for the win at Fresno State on the road in a hostel. It was a lot of people there, and he basically said, "No, we're just gonna go win it right now." And he just really kept doing it. Like sometimes coaches just have it, and Oregon State's lucky to have him. Hopefully, you guys don't lose him. I know, that happens, but he's a very, very good coach. And when you're looking at the schedule, I think they did it right. So we're not seeing a bunch of, San Jose State and UC Davis. I will say San Jose State's passing attack is something to watch that first game to see how is that cornerbacks and how did that secondary kind of step up. UC Davis is a very good small school out here, but they should not hold the weight to Oregon State. And then, San Diego State will be a tougher game, but that offense is not very good. So I think if they can kind of attack that defense and be there, really it comes down to that Washington State game in Utah. Like those two games are pretty close. Cameron Ward, can he step up? And then you got that Utah game. That end stretch though is tough. Like Washington, Oregon in there. Any games, highlight for you, or what is your play here for their schedule?
So once we get to Utah, I think we're going to know what this team is. I think they have that little break there with Cal, but then the UCLA Arizona back to back, and then going to Arizona. I think Arizona is going to be a good football team this year. So I think that's going to, their over under is 8 this year. I think when you look at the front end of their schedule, you think, okay, they can get there. But then, if they drop UCLA, Utah, Arizona, then you're struggling because you get the first 4, you get Cal, you have to get Colorado and Stanford, and that's what, 7, I think. So then you've got to win one against one of these big programs, or Arizona, which I doubted them a lot last year. I don't think I want to do the same thing based on how well coached they were and how well they played. But now they have a quarterback that I'm not 100% certain in. And so I might hit the under on that. But I don't know. We just talked about how good of a team they are. I'm really circling that Arizona game. I think that could be a really fun one with Arizona's offense and what I hope their defense will be by the end of October.
Yeah, 8's perfect. 8's a perfect number out there for Vegas. If it's at 7.5, I'd probably smash 8 because I think that they could beat Arizona. But I think it's a push regardless. I think 8 wins a pretty good, barometer for this program here in the regular season. But yeah, you're right. Arizona matters because they shouldn't lose to Stanford, Colorado, Cal. You're not losing those teams, and then you shouldn't lose those first 3 games. So you're right there. You beat Washington State, then you got to beat Arizona. I mean, that's where it's at. But again, they beat Oregon last year, so we're just dismissing it that they didn't do that. So don't yell at us, Oregon State fans. We know you guys are well coached and you're out there. Let us know in the comments. What do you guys think? What's a good number for you guys at 8, 7, 6, 9? Where do you guys think you are? And then moving forward, can you get another bowl win? And how does that look? So so that's Oregon State Beavers. You guys have a hell of a program that's well coached, and you guys have done a great job in the recruiting. And getting in the top 25 in the preseason is a good feat for an Oregon State program that's looking to really kind of in the landscape that's changing of college football, where conference you guys are going to play in. Like you guys are really building something that's good that can have a lasting staying power. Anything else on Oregon State before we get out of here?
No, I'm excited to see what they do with the 2024 recruiting class because I think they have an opportunity here to, after the big 2 leave the Pac-12, I think there's certainly an opportunity to go get some conference titles. And so you look at their 2023 class, you're pretty excited about that. But I think the state of this program is really good right now, and I'm excited to watch them this year.
Yeah. All right, guys. We'll check you guys later. Got our Patreon video. Go check us out on the Patreon. We appreciate you guys. See you guys next time.
Have you joined the Devy Royale's Patreon? With 3 tiers to cover your Devy, college football, and dynasty needs, the Devy Royale has a tier for you. Patrons in the day tier or higher get exclusive access to the rankings database, including consensus combined Devy and Dynasty rankings, each analyst's personal rankings, and separated Devy and Dynasty rankings for every type of fantasy football draft. Patrons in all tiers get access to the incredibly active Discord server, in which our community collectively helps each other win fantasy leagues and has fun in the process. Last but not least, all patrons in the day tier or higher get access to the College Football Manifesto, a more than 300-page document highlighting every Power 5 college football team, Devy players, mock drafts, strategy guides, position battles, and so much more. Head to patreon.com/the Devy Royale to join today.